Hello everyone, and welcome to this another video of Basics of React series. Coming back from the previous video where we talked about hooks, React hooks, and in particular we spoke about the use effect hook. Today we'll be talking about the use state, and we'll be talking about state in particular. So we'll be going through the use of use state hook and why we're using it and how important it is in React's context. So firstly, let's focus on what a state is. So state is basically a component's memory. So components often need to change what's on the screen uh, as a result of the user interactions that we do. So typing into a form, for example, should update the input field, or clicking next on an image carousel should change which image is displayed. So clicking buy on a particular product in shopping cart of an e-commerce website, uh, they should perform a particular change to that particular state. So components need to remember things uh, like the input value, the image, and the shopping cart. So in React, we this kind of component-specific memory is called state. So why are regular variables not enough in the context of React? Um, so for example, here is an example, a basic React code that I've just written. So I'm using playcode.io's React Playground, and I would suggest you to use this playground as well. So there are other ones like Code Sandbox, but for this particular example, I've chosen this. So I've already written some code uh, regarding which just displays a particular object. So the object has some data. So I've created a sculpture list. It's an array of objects, and each object has some data fields like name, artist description, an image URL, and yeah, an alternate text for that image. So what I'm doing is I'm exporting this array and I'm importing it in my app.js, and I want to display this particular the array of uh, objects. So the task is, when I click the next button, it has to change. It has to go to the next object in that array. So for that, I've written a relevant code. I've so there's this function gallery, and so inside of that, I'm taking an index equals to 0. So and I'm also calling a handle click here. So there's a button click here. So when I click it, it has to trigger handle click, and the index has to increase to has to increment to +1. So when that happens, so the sculptor moves to the second index, the next index, and we would be displaying uh, the object, the second object's name, artist, so on and so forth. So this is what is supposed to happen. But here, when I'm clicking on the next button, it's not happening. It's just showing the data of the first index that you can see here. So it's just the first index data, and it's not incrementing. It's not changing. So this will not work. So what's happening is that the handle click event handler is updating the local variable index, but there are things that prevent that change from being visible. So as we know, in React, there's a lot. It renders with each and every change that happens to it. So local variables don't persist between the renders. So when React renders this component a second time, this gallery component, which I am rendering it inside of the app, so it won't render. So I mean, it renders from scratch and it doesn't consider any change which happened to the local variables. So let's do one thing. Let's do a console.log. you see it's not incrementing. Let's just do this, place it here. So what you see here is that it is incrementing the index in the context of this function, but as it's a local variable, it will not persist between the renders. So when the index value is moving out of this particular function and going into this global scope, so it's losing that state. I would say that it's rendering this component from scratch. So it won't consider any changes which is happening to the local variables, and changes to the local variables, it will never trigger a render. So React will not realize that it needs to render the component again with the new data. To update the component with new data, two things need to happen. So we need to retain the data between the renders and uh, trigger the React to renders the component with new data. So we have to make it re-render. So for that, useState hook provides the solution for that. So a state variable can be used to retain the data between the renders, and also a state setter function will be used to update the variable and trigger React to render the component again. So to add a state to add a state variable, let's import useState from React at the top of the file. Another thing I would suggest to use Playground is because when you create new projects of React in your local machines, so it always downloads all those node modules, and easily each and every project would go around 800 to 900 MB of size. So that is not feasible, and especially if you're constrained for space. So I would suggest to practice on playgrounds, code sandboxes. Okay. So moving on, let's replace this let index equals to 0 with const index and set index. This here index is a state variable and set index is a state setter function. So I'll just tell you about it in a bit. And fetch is initialized to 0. Okay, cool. So index is a state variable and set index is a setter function. And this particular type of format syntax is called array destructuring, and it lets us read the values from an array. And the array which is written by the use state, it always has exactly two items. So this function, it always has two functions, two items. It's the state variable and the state setter function. So yeah, so that this is the standard format of the use state hook. So you, it's the standard format of using it. So now let's see how they work together in handle click. So we've so when we click the next button, the handle click event function is triggered. So here, what we will do is let's invoke the set index setter function. Uh, yeah, we can do set index, and we'll invoke this state which is index plus 1. So what this would do is when handle click event is triggered, uh, it calls upon the set index setter function, and it sets the state to uh, and increments it by 1. So let's see if it works. Voila, it works. So yeah, yeah, perfect. And you can see the index changing here as well. So this is the state, the use state hook, and There are other hooks also which start with use. So and any other hook which starts with use, it's a hook. I mean, you can just recognize that that's a hook. So hooks are special functions which are only available while React is rendering, and state is just one of those features. But we will actually talk about the other hooks later. So we'll see use state in detail here. So when we call the use state, so we are telling React that we want this component to remember something. So in this case, we want React to remember the state, the index. So the convention is to name pairs like const index or set index, like something or set something. So we can also name it anything, like I have put index, set index. You can just say anything else like const number, set number, or const string, comma, set string. And here we'll just say this would be the initial state value. So whatever we are passing as the parameter. So here it's 0. So that's the first index. So I've set it as 0. The only argument, like I mentioned, the use state is the initial value of the state variable. And here it is set to 0. So every time the component renders, the use state gives us an array of containing two values, which is the state variable index uh, with the value that we stored, and the state setter function, which can update the state variable and trigger React to render the component again. So so when our component renders the first time, uh, so because we pass the value as 0 to use state as the initial value, it will return 0 comma set index, and React will remember the 0 is the latest value. So if you can see this here, we've printed the index here. It remembers that, so it will return that. So when we update the state, so when we click on the button uh, here, it calls the set index plus 1, and so as the index is 0, so it's going to be set index of 1. So it returns 1 comma set index. So this is what it will be. Here it will be 1 comma set index. Uh, and then on the second render, it still sees use state 0. Uh, but because React remembers that we set it to 1, it will return 1 comma set index instead. So that's the thing. So doesn't really matter how many times we are clicking next. So the use states, the index initial value is always 0. It will be 0 because we have hard coded the value. But because because React remembers that we set the index to the previous value, so it will always remember that, and it will populate index with that particular value, and it will return the set index function, and yeah, so on and so forth. So if, for example, we can have a component can have multiple state variables, and similarly, let's have so we have details, right? In the data.js, we have some details. So what we can do now is let's create a new state, const show more, set show more. So here we use state. So it's like a choice. Should it show more or not? So as it's a choice, I'll say false. So initially I'll take it as false, and then I'll create another button here. For that, I'll have to create a function first. Function handle more click. Okay, and here we'll call set show more. This is show more. I'll just say not. So whatever it is, it would just flip the value of show. So let's create a button here. Um, let's- yep. Yeah. What we can do is let's create a button, and here let's say show more. If it is true, we'll just say hide. If not, we'll make sure. And on click, it has to trigger handle more click, right? And here in the image, not just image, I think what we can do is below this button, if show more is true, and we'll have a p tag with the description. Sure. Dot description. Um, yeah. So where do we have this? So I think we can remove all of this for now. Okay. So when so like, oh yeah, now you can see this. Let's console log show more. Let's run it again. So here it's false. So the initial value is set to false, and it doesn't really show anything because we are saying that if it is true, then it has to turn, the text has to turn to hide, and if it is false, it has to show show. And also, if the show more is true, only then we can see the description, and the initial state is set to false. So when I click on this button, show more, you can see the description. So what's happening here? So when I'm clicking on this button, it's triggering the function handle more click. And here in the handle more click, it's flipping the state of the show more to whatever it was. I mean, it's flipping it to the other one. For example, if it is false, it turns it to true. Now, if I click that again, it's flipping it to false. So so this is a good idea to have. It gives you a good idea of what's actually happening um, in using useState. So it's a very important and one of the most basic hooks. And it's also a good idea to have multiple state variables if their state is unrelated, like in this example, index and show more. And if we find that we have that we often have to change the two state variables together, it might be easier to like to combine them into one. So yeah, and always it's always important to keep the state isolated and private. And state is local to a component instance on the screen. And if we render the same component twice, each copy will have a completely different isolated state or a completely different state. And also state variables need to be declared at the top at the start of the component function, just like we import all these important packages at the top. So it's very important to remember that. And yeah, this is pretty much a basic example of the use state React hook. And yeah, in simple terms, it's a component's memory. State is a component's memory, and use state hook uh, allows us to manipulate a component's memory in a very efficient and uh, compliant in a way which is compliant to React. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And see you in the next one. Thank you.